This week on Government Matters.
I've got a simple message for all the dedicated and patriotic federal workers. Thanks for your service. Welcome back.
After a 16-day shutdown, the government is back in business.
It could be conceivable that almost every federal agency could potentially use a UAS because there's so many potential uses of them.
Unmanned aerial systems coming to a federal agency near you.
$7 billion alone isn't enough to build an entire network for public safety.
The largest public telecom project in history will rely on the private sector. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
Thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every Sunday we'll bring you the week's top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. Topping headlines this Sunday, the government shutdown is over. Let's hit some of the highlights. Nearly 500,000 federal workers are back on the job. Officials restored agency websites and renewed their presence on social media. Most federal workers furloughed during the shutdown will receive back pay on October 29th. They will also see a 1% pay raise in January. Defense Department Comptroller Robert Hale says the shutdown will cost DoD at least $600 million in lost productivity. He says other costs have not been calculated. Renee Marsh has more.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Tourists lined up as the nation's parks, museums, and memorials reopened for business, from the Florida Everglades to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum.
How's it feel to be inside today?
Better ask him.
How's it feel to be inside today?
Awesome.
Good morning.
Employees are back on the job after 3 weeks of forced time off.
It's good to be back at work.
Yeah. On Capitol Hill, where most members have fled for their home district, a furloughed staffer got the historic Ohio clock ticking again. But as the vice president greeted returning EPA employees with muffins, he warned all that time off would mean a backlog of paperwork.
Now they're back and they got all that work piled up, so they got a lot to do, so I'm not going to hold them up there anymore.
For the first few days back, federal employees say they'll be playing catch up.
That's the number one thing, is to figure out, okay, what did go on work-wise for the past couple of weeks.
This FAA employee told us it could take him a week to clear the backlog. Medical researchers say it will take time to ramp up their projects again. The good news? Once again, Americans can tune into the National Zoo's Panda Cam, which is broadcasting online, with heightened interest causing some delays. One thing on the minds of many, hoping Congress doesn't force them through another shutdown in a few months.
My understanding is this is just for 90 days. After the 90 days, then what?
Renee Marsh reporting. Now some top names making headlines this week. President Obama called back a trusted counterterrorism advisor to lead Homeland Security. Jay Johnson served as the Pentagon's top lawyer during Obama's first term. If confirmed by the Senate, he would replace Janet Napolitano. Reuters reports the director of the NSA, Army General Keith Alexander, and his deputy will step down next spring. At 8 years, Alexander is the NSA's longest-serving chief. But his tenure was rocked this May after the Washington Post and Guardian newspapers published documents leaked by Edward Snowden. They detailed widespread surveillance via telephone, email, and social media. An agency spokeswoman says the leak did not play a role in Alexander's decision. We also have a few contract notes to pass along this week. Let's start with IBM. Fierce Government reports IBM has filed a pair of injunction requests in federal claims court, all part of an ongoing dispute over the CIA's $600 million cloud computing contract. Washington Technology reports NASA and the GSA will push back contract deadlines because of the government shutdown. SOUP 5 moves to November 1st. OASIS moves to October 30th. For the past few weeks on Government Matters, we've been tracking the shutdown's impact on federal workers. Long-term, it could hurt agencies' ability to recruit or retain top talent. This week, some federal workers got a chance to look around with help from a free website. Hatsavella explains.
They call it their cave, almost like a bachelor pad with a techie twist.
The wall is a notepad for ideas, and one of them just took off.
We were not prepared for the traffic, the amount of traffic that we have gotten.
Thousands of hits in just days. An email from a federal worker looking for a part-time gig is what sparked the idea. 2 weeks ago, this team of developers borrowed some of the data already out there and launched the site overnight.
For a site that was posted at 1 a.m. in the morning, and by 8 a.m. or so, it was already crashing.
Called unfurlough.us, the site is simple. It has 2 sections, one for companies offering gigs, the second for freelancers looking for work. So far, more than 100 postings related to software development, design, and editing are listed.
The salary range that we saw is from like mid-20s all the way to $90 an hour.
It's obvious the demand is a direct result of the government shutdown. People looking to make a couple bucks while not working.
They have to pay their bills, they have the car payments is still going, the mortgage is still going. They have to, and most people live, paycheck to paycheck. So it makes sense when there's a disruption in their income. Obviously, they will jump in to figure out a different way to get compensated.
The need is there, evidenced by companies who days after posting jobs come back and urge the developers to take down the posting.
With all honesty, we are pleased that the tool that we created in about 5 hours, it actually has gotten this much attention and is being a useful tool for so many furloughed employees.
Not a huge effort, no big marketing push. Just demand, which now has these guys thinking this site could turn into a long-term project. Now, if you're trying to find a part-time job, the developers of the software say that you should check with your federal employer to make sure that 2 things. 1, you don't violate any rules, and 2, that you're not breaking any sort of conflict of interest. Reporting in the Satellite Center, Hat Savella for Government Matters.
We'll turn from headlines to tech, straight ahead on Government Matters. Industry analysts expect unmanned aircraft systems to grow into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Soon the FAA will put them to the test. We'll talk about the implications for federal agencies next. In Tech Matters, the federal government and unmanned aircraft systems. This December, the FAA will choose 6 test sites from dozens of applicants to study the safety of drones in commercial airspace. Meanwhile, some agencies are already putting them to use. For more, we turn to our guest on Government Matters, Ben Gilo. He's an attorney with the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Ben, let's talk about December. What happens after these test sites are selected?
Hi, Morris. So after the FAA selects these 6 test sites, they're going to stand them up operationally, and then it'll be up to the test site operator themselves to decide how are they going to manage allowing unmanned aircraft of all different size, small, medium, and large, to fly within some kind of geographic area along with other manned aircraft.
Now, the government closed for 16 days this month. Will that slow down this process?
It's a little too early to tell right now, Morris, but it's likely, and I say that because the deadlines that Congress imposed on the FAA to integrate unmanned aircraft have all kind of slid to the right, and so likely this might get pushed back. However, I would note that the FAA certainly understands the amount of congressional interest, but also the amount of interest from the states to get these sites picked. So there is some pressure that the FAA is feeling.
In September, the Department of Justice Inspector General released a report on the use of UAS by federal law enforcement. It found the following. 4 Justice Department agencies own an unmanned aircraft system. Only the FBI uses one operationally, notably during this year's hostage crisis in Alabama to rescue a small boy from an underground bunker. Furthermore, DOJ has spent nearly $4 million on these systems over the past 9 years. Ben, law enforcement operations like that hostage crisis are highly visible. Let's talk about the rest of federal government. What other agencies currently employ UAS, and for what purpose?
Morris, it could be conceivable that almost every federal agency could potentially use a UAS because there's so many potential uses of them. A few examples, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol are currently flying Predators on the northern and on the southern border to do border security, but they've also used those same systems to help out in some natural disasters, for instance, flooding in the Midwest. NASA and NOAA are currently working on a hurricane study mission, so they're flying old Air Force Global Hawks off the East Coast. NOAA is also doing some scientific research on the Pacific Ocean. They're actually looking for tsunami debris that's making its way over to the coast, in addition to doing wildland surveys, for instance, monitoring different kind of seabirds.
It's incredible looking at this video. This is a whole new industry that's suddenly taking off, no pun intended. What are the implications for federal contractors?
Well, the primary market for unmanned systems has been the Department of Defense. But as the FAA begins to write the safety rules to allow these systems to fly in the national airspace, you'll start to see these systems and the market for them really start to shift over to the commercial sector. So agriculture is going to be the biggest market in our projections. In fact, an economic report that we did earlier this year said that the agriculture market could make up 80% of the future market.
Before you go, let's do a little show and tell. I understand this model, the air robot, is made in Germany. Tell us more.
Well, this robot has actually been built for, I think, about the last 10 or so years. It weighs 2 pounds. It flies at several hundred feet in altitude. The camera is what's hanging down on the bottom. It can fly for about 45 minutes. And the way it's being used currently, internationally, but also here domestically, is to help farmers monitor their crops, help public safety agencies monitor fires or look for suspects that may be on the loose. It's also good for infrastructure monitoring, to monitor maybe the underside of a bridge or along power lines or transmission lines.
It's fascinating stuff. I think we should have a UAV of the month, because these things just keep changing. They keep getting better and better as time goes by. Ben Gilo with the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Morris. Always a pleasure.
We'll turn from tech to security, straight ahead on Government Matters. When traditional modes of communication go down, the FCC wants first responders to have a network they can fall back on. We update you on the largest telecom project in history, next. In security matters, the creation of a nationwide public safety network. The effort dates back to 2007. That's when the FCC set up regulations. In 2009, the agency set aside spectrum for such a network. 3 years later, Congress created the First Responder Network Authority and started building a staff. Joining me now with more details on Government Matters is Tony Rahm, technology reporter for Politico Pro. Tony, FirstNet Chairman Samuel Ginn calls this the largest telecom project in history. It has a $7 billion budget. What's the goal here?
You know, $7 billion to bring public safety communications into the digital age. You know, in September 11, 2001, in the recovery efforts for Hurricane Katrina, we saw cops and firefighters unable to communicate with each other and unable to do so using the same sorts of devices that consumers use today. So Congress recognized it had to devote $7 billion and some new spectrum to the plan, and we're just getting started with this process to build out this network, but it's already proving tough, and there are lots of hurdles still to overcome.
Yeah, it's taken a long time to get this going. How would this system interact with commercial services?
Well, that's still not yet determined, but the goal is to rely on some of the infrastructure that AT&T and Verizon and other sorts of telecom contractors and other companies already have in place, because $7 billion alone isn't enough to build an entire network for public safety. So lots of partnerships with the individual commercial carriers, lots of business opportunity for companies as well.
Politically, this network got off to a rocky start, including complaints of conflict of interest. Bring us up to date.
Sure. So, you know, companies have a lot at stake here. With a $7 billion network, the largest telecommunication project in the nation's history, there's a lot for companies to gain and lose in terms of business. And we've seen them deploy big bucks lobbying operations in order to safeguard their business. We've especially seen that in the case of Motorola Solutions, a major telecommunications equipment provider. You know, documents and sources told Politico that, you know, Motorola has gone out to individual state attorneys general. They've gone to local first responders trying to discredit this network because they recognize it potentially could threaten their business. But Motorola says it's just raising legitimate concerns with FirstNet and how Congress authorized the network.
You're right, and I've got more to add on that. Motorola does have a dog in this fight. Their legacy radio-based devices are widely used by first responders. You write, quote, Motorola Solutions has labored extensively aggressively this year to highlight flaws with the network, known as FirstNet, which could cut into one of the company's key sources of revenue. Now, the Fraternal Order of Police is not happy about this. Tony, explain.
Sure, this bubbled up earlier this month. You know, Motorola has a number of consultants on both the business and the policy side. One of its business consultants went out to Virginia to meet with the local chapter of the Fraternal Order of Police. He says he wasn't doing so under Motorola orders. He was acting on his own volition, but it still left quite a bad taste in the mouth of the Fraternal Order back in D.C., which issued a very strong statement against the company, a statement that I'll add that referenced a letter from Senator Jay Rockefeller, which pointed out the company had already lobbied extensively in other settings to discredit the network. So lots of skepticism here, but again, in this instance, Motorola says it didn't send the consultant. It wasn't trying to cause any trouble.
Now, all politics aside, do contractors like Motorola stand to make a lot of money on FirstNet?
They do, but they're waiting to see what FirstNet's going to do and how the build-out's going to look. We're still waiting for some key documents that would specify the business plan, the sort of network specifications that FirstNet desires. So very much in a cautious waiting period right now.
We've come so far from the brick phones back in the 80s, haven't we? Tony Rahm, technology reporter for Politico Pro. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. The shutdown could cost federal agencies billions, a figure that will certainly be felt in the contracting community. How will small to mid-sized companies adjust? Two CEOs join me next. In Management Matters, how small and mid-sized contractors have been impacted by the brutal budget battle on Capitol Hill. First, sequestration, then a government shutdown. Now another looming fiscal crisis scheduled for early next year. For CEOs, this might be described as the perfect storm. We have two CEOs in studio this week. Min Chong, CEO of Strategic Operational Solutions, an IT strategy and management consulting firm based in Vienna, Virginia. And Belinda Coleman, CEO of the Coleman Group, an IT consulting and security solutions firm based in Lanham, Maryland. The government furloughed hundreds of thousands of federal workers this month. Min, were you forced to furlough any of your staff?
Yes, we were. We had just recently received a contract from one of the DHS agencies, and that was on September 30th, and we were ramping up to start work on October 1st. And then we received a stop work letter, so we had to put those folks on furlough, about 10 people.
That's got to be rough and not unique to your situation. Belinda, I'd like to talk about cash flow.
Sure.
It can present a challenge for small businesses, even in the best of times. What about now? Does the government even pay vendors during a shutdown?
No, the government does not pay vendors during the shutdown. Our DOD clients did pay during the shutdown, but it was really varied upon which agency you were working with.
So this hurt financially then?
Most definitely. We practice prudent financial management operations, so we were able to so far withstand it, but it has made a substantial impact.
Anything like this ever happened to you before?
Nothing like this has never happened before, and we would hope that it would never happen again, but we will take measures to be better prepared in the future.
And Min, your company does a lot of work with the Defense Department. Their budget is expected to shrink. Has that forced you to consider adjacent markets or forced you to compete against companies you've never competed against before?
Absolutely. We have seen a shrinkage of our current contracts within the Department of Defense, and that has forced us, or that has allowed us, whichever way you want to see it, to go after other agencies. So we have had some success at DHS and VA. Now, having said that, there has been a huge push for small businesses, more opportunities for small businesses. So that has also given us more opportunities to pursue.
Now, this month, Stan Soloway, president of the Professional Services Council, discussed this issue with Washington Technology. He's worried that the shutdown will cut into company profits. Here's a quote. Depending on the length of the shutdown, it won't take long for some companies to have lost revenue equal to or greater than their entire annual profit. The shutdown lasted 16 days. Were Soloway's concerns justified, Belinda?
Yes, they are definitely justified because you work all year very, very hard preparing for new contracts and new work, and once they're awarded, then you get a stop work order not to exercise those contracts beginning October 1, which was extremely detrimental, and depending on the amount, it could definitely impact your bottom line in more ways than one.
The shutdown might be over, but challenges for small and mid-sized contractors don't end there. Agencies like the Commerce Department will be playing catch-up. Min, what do you expect going forward?
I think there's going to be a surge of activity from a procurement perspective because of the 2-week delay. We have been expecting to hear back on other opportunities that we've submitted proposals on, but that's obviously going to be delayed as well. So there's going to be a surge of, let's catch up and try to get things back on track going forward in the next couple months.
Belinda, what about you? What's the future hold?
I think, like with men, we're expecting to hear from some awards that will be delayed because of 2 weeks of lack of productivity. So those responses have not been reviewed. Likewise, I do think that there will be a surge in activity, not just for the shutdown period, but with a possible delay early next year. I think our clients want to make sure they're productive and move their business forward.
Good luck to both of you. Belinda Coleman, CEO of the Coleman Group, and Min Chong, CEO of Strategic Operational Solutions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. This month, 500,000 federal workers suddenly had a lot of time on their hands. Some of them looked for part-time work, tried to ride out the storm. Others drank. The Washington Post reports internet searches for the term happy hour were way up in the D.C. area this month. WTOP reports online dating also shot through the roof. Zoosk, a site with 40 million members, reported a 110% increase in activity in the Washington area. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. Your week is filled with other matters. Safe Sundays for us.